Hello everyone, this is Dr. Afshan Hashmi, live from Rockford Studio. And today, friends, I will be talking about docu series. And here are my two books. Before starting in my docu series about Hajj, I will be talking about Hajj. And today the Holy Pilgrimage to Makkah. And friends, here are my two books: The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection, as well as The Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And I want a movie to be made of this book, The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. So, all those Hollywood, Bollywood, Netflix producers, please contact me at Afshan at drafshanhashmi.com. And for my second book, the Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace, I want a documentary to be made, and this is in case study format. So, all those documentary makers, please contact me at Afshan at drafshanhashmi.com. Having said that, friends, let's start the Hajj series. And I have got information from Saudi Gazette, and here it is, Saudi Gazette, and here is the information. And this is the front page of Saudi Gazette. So I got that information from here. And this show is not sponsored by Saudi Gazette. I just love the information there, and that's why I'm sharing this information. And also, if it has been sponsored by anyone, I will always give a true picture of everything, and that's what I believe in. So, if you have any information you want to share here, because this show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million listeners. And friends, let's talk about a little bit from the Saudi Gazette, and it says pilgrims perform Tawaf al Qudum before moving into Mina as Hajj to begin first. And it says Makkah, and this is July 6, 2022 news. Makkah, a large number of Hajj pilgrims performed on Wednesday the ritual of Tawaf al-Qudum, Tawaf of arrival, before their moving into Mina on the day of Salbiya, Thursday, which is the first day of the annual pilgrimage of Hajj. There are total of 1 million pilgrims performing Hajj this year. Around 150,000 domestic pilgrims who joined about 8 lakhs 50,000 foreign pilgrims. The foreign pilgrims are performing Hajj for the first time after a hiatus of 2 years, following the travel restrictions caused by the outbreak of coronavirus pandemic. Only limited number of domestic pilgrims were allowed to perform Hajj during 2020 and 2021 Hajj seasons due to the unprecedented pandemic situation. On the morning of Wednesday, 7th of Dhul Hijjah, pilgrims flocked to the Grand Mosque in Makkah to perform the arrival tawaf before their convergence on the 10th city of Makkah to start their spiritual journey of a lifetime. Pilgrims will move into Mina tonight and Thursday morning to mark the beginning of the annual pilgrimage. They will spend the day and night in Mina, engaged in their spiritual preparations for the standing at Arafat, which marks the climax of the Hajj pilgrimage on Friday. Meanwhile, the General Presidency for the Affairs of the Two Holy Mosques, represented by the Agency of Counseling and Guardians Affairs, announced that it has identified 3 areas at Grand Mosque to provide services for the pilgrims performing Tawaf. These areas are Sheikh Fahad Gate, Riyadh Gate, and Al Salam Gate. The agency clarified that these pilgrims will be received at these locations, with facilitating them to perform their rituals in complete peace of mind and feeling of security. The presidency confirmed that there are more than 100 mutawids or Hajj guides to supervise the services being rendered to the pilgrims and meet their requests through accompanying them to perform their rituals. The mutawids are being provided with several training and orientation courses relating related to the rituals of Hajj, in addition to enabling them to acquire several skills for dealing and communicating with the pilgrims. The presidency said, adding that they are also directed to comply with the precautionary measures. So now let's and there is a very interesting news here. Attorney General, Secretariat slogan forbidden in Hajj. And this is the news. And it says Makkah, Saudi Arabia's Attorney General Sheikh Saud Al Mujab emphasized on Wednesday that Hajj is a religious duty of Muslims and it is forbidden to raise sectarian and political slogans during Hajj. Such acts would warrant strict criminal accountability, he warned. Al-Muajab made the remarks after inaugurating the activities of the Hajj prosecution office in Makkah. Earlier this week, the public prosecution has created 20 new specialized prosecution wings at the holy sites during the year's Hajj season. This is in addition to the existing 7 wings. With this, the number of prosecution wings operating at the holy sites during the Hajj season rose to 27. Let me go on a break and we'll be back soon. So now I was reading about this news. Attorney General Secretarian slogan forbidden in Hajj from Saudi Gazette. And here is so Sheikh Al-Mujab made the remarks after inaugurating the activities of the Hajj Prosecution Office in Makkah. Earlier this week, the public prosecution has created 20 new specialized prosecution wings at the holy sites during the year's Hajj season. This is in addition to the existing 7 wings. With this, the number of prosecution wings operating at the holy sites during the Hajj season rose to 27. The wings, namely Prosecution for Hajj Works, will operate around the clock. Sheikh Al-Muajab underlined the need for maintaining the sanctity of the holy sites where shedding of blood is forbidden. The public prosecutor also stressed the inviolability of felony against Hajj and Umrah pilgrims in all its forms or the exploitation of religious rights or the holy places. The public prosecution is keen on ensuring the safety and protection of Hajj pilgrims from any crimes and injustice, and hence it would impose the most severe penalties against those committing such crimes, he said. Sheikh Al-Mu'ajab noted the utmost keenness and special care that Saudi Arabia attaches to the holy sites as well as to the Hajj and Umrah pilgrims ever since the unification of Saudi Arabia by its founder, King Abdulaziz, until today. He highlighted the support and follow up of custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, for the Hajj and the pilgrims. He also lauded the kingdom's just systems that safeguard the rights of Hajj and Umrah pilgrims and serve their interests. The public prosecution stated that the new prosecution wings are specialized in all the judicial prosecution procedures, which include investigations, public prosecution, appeal of judgments, oversight and inspection of prisons and places of detention, and supervision of the execution of criminal verdicts. The public prosecution stated that the 20 new prosecution wings are employed with staffers who possess distinguished judicial competence. So this was another report from Saudi Gazette. Then it says ministry receives 185 pilgrims from custodian of the two holy mosques guest program. And here it says the Ministry of Hajj and Umrah received 185 pilgrims from the program of the custodian of the two holy mosques guest program for Hajj and Umrah who arrived at King Abdulaziz International Airport in Jeddah. The program aims this year to enable the representatives of the countries working in the Islamic Military Counter-Terrorism Coalition coming from 41 countries and a group of families of martyrs and wounded in terrorist attacks coming from 8 countries to perform Hajj for this 1443H. As many as 130 representatives and their families from different Islamic nationalities from the delegation of the member states of the Islamic Military Counter-Terrorism Coalition (IMCTC) expressed their thanks to the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, for choosing them to perform Hajj this year 1443H. They stressed the wise leadership of Saudi Arabia spares no effort in everything that serves Islam and Muslims, expressing their thanks and appreciation for this good thing. So another news is Viqaya highlights do's and don'ts to prevent COVID-19 and other diseases during Hajj. Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's public health authority Wiqaya revealed the proper behavior that the pilgrims should adhere to in the event that they were confirmed to be infected with COVID-19 virus during the performance of the Hajj ritual. Wiqaya said that upon confirmation of infection with COVID-19, the pilgrim must comply with isolation and follow the instructions issued in this regard. In addition, the pilgrim should consult the campaign doctor immediately, especially with regard to taking medicines that reduce coughing or sore throat, Vikaya said, while warning against not using antibiotics without a prescription. Vikaya also issued several journal tips to maintain the health of the pilgrims as well as to avoid infection of respiratory diseases. Respiratory diseases are among the most common diseases during the Hajj season, and these included seasonal flu and corona infection. Vikaya said, noting that the main cause of transmission from one person to another is through coughing or sneezing. Pilgrims must adhere to several journal precautions to limit the spread of infection with the COVID-19 virus, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome (MERS), and the seasonal influenza virus, Vihaya said. Pilgrims should wash their hands with soap and water or disinfect them with alcoholic gel in the event that soap and water are not continuously available, Vihaya said, while noting that the period of hand washing should not be less than 40 seconds and the period of hand sterilization should not be less than 20 seconds. Vakaya also added that it is important for pilgrims to be keen to maintain the use of masks and avoid touching the eyes, mouth, or nose, as well as to pay attention to maintain personal hygiene at all times. Keeping sufficient distances from others as much as possible, especially in crowded places, and avoiding approaching infected people would contribute significantly to limiting the spread of viruses. It also alerted to use tissues when coughing and sneezing and then throwing them in the designated places. In the event of suffering from symptoms of respiratory diseases, Vikaya called on the pilgrims that they must be careful to wear a mask permanently so as not to harm others. It also noted that it is important not to use other people's tools or to share their tools with others. The face mask must cover the nose, mouth, and chin area, and it is necessary to replace it periodically or when it becomes dirty or wet. With the importance of the pilgrim's keenness to avoid throwing the mask in places other than those designated for it. Vikaya indicated that pilgrims must wear masks at all times in all holy sites and facilities, whether closed or open, and during the performance of the Hajj rituals, which include gathering places and crowds inside the Grand Mosque and the Prophet Mosque, and during the performance of Tawaf, Sa'i, and while stoning at the Jamara. So this is some very good news, friends, from Saudi Gazette, and here, so I was talking about Saudi Gazette from Saudi Gazette. Then let's talk little bit from Surah Hajj, and this is the book. And from Surah Hajj, let's start from Surah Hajj. Interpretation of Surah Hajj, and it is Surah 22 Al Hajj, the pilgrimage. This surah opens with an emotional appeal highlighting the terrifying aspects of the Day of Judgment designed to shock humans and shake their consciousness. Humankind have fear of your Lord, the shuddering on the Day of Judgment shall be tremendous. When the day comes, every nursing mother shall forsake her infant, every pregnant female shall deliver her burden, and you shall see people reeling like drunkards, although they are not drunk. We learn from the Prophet that the advent of the Day of Judgment will be accompanied by tremendous cataclysmic disturbances such as volcanic eruptions when the earth will be gripped in the throes of death. This initial shocking appeal is followed immediately by a rather sober and rational one. Humankind, if you are in doubt over resurrection, remember that we first created you from dust, then from a drop of fluid, then from a spot of blood, then from a lump of flesh, developed and not fully developed, so that we might manifest you to our power. Skepticism over the resurrection is a direct outcome of ignorance and lack of understanding of how life came into being. Skeptics tend to believe that resurrection is a completely isolated event, bearing no relation, bearing no relationship to the whole cycle of creation and life on earth. We see life and life form. Let me go on a break and we'll be back. So now I'm back and it says skepticism over the resurrection is a direct outcome of ignorance and lack of understanding of how life came into being. Skeptics can whether to believe that resurrection is a completely isolated event bearing no relationship to the whole cycle of creation and life on earth. We see life and life forms being created every second, which should tell us that a second cycle of life or a new creation of the same life form is plausible and indeed feasible. This leads us to what? Who is responsible for the creation of the male sperm? Under what power does this sperm develop and finds its way to the female egg to produce a fetus carrying all the vital genetic information that will shape its future and eventually develop into a fully formed human being? How is this creature able to leave its mother's womb and adapt almost immediately to the new environment outside, where for the first time its lungs have to breathe in air and its eyes have to cope with the powerful light rays? Who has endowed human beings with these amazing genetic features and inherent capabilities? The creation of life is not a freak accident brought about by blind chance or by some obscure laws of probability. It is a phenomenon that has been occurring an infinite number of times in an infinite number of ways over an incredibly long period of time. The surah turns to yet another marvel of creation. Look at the soil when it is dry and barren, but no sooner do we send down rainwater upon it than it is revived and begins to swell and bring forth radiant and blooming plants of every kind. This again leads us to ask, how does all this come about? How can we observe this revival taking place before our very eyes and yet fail to accept that life can be resurrected? And this is, I'm reading the interpretation of Al Hajj, the pilgrimage. Here it is. Look at the soil when it is dry and barren, but no sooner do we send down rainwater upon it than it is revived and begins to swell and bring forth radiant and blooming plants of every kind. This again leads us to ask, how does all this come about? How can we observe this revival taking place before our eyes and yet fail to accept that life can be resurrected? Out of dead soil grow crops and plants, providing staple foods for animals and humans, containing starch, sugar, fat, salt, minerals, and vitamins, all of which constitute the very essential element for sustaining life. We are bound to inquire about the power that lies behind all this. These phenomena are indisputable since we believe that we can see and observe. We ought not to doubt that the dead can be brought back to life again. The Surah gives the only possible logical explanation. That is because God is the ultimate truth. It is He who resurrects the dead. It is He who has power over all things. The hour of resurrection is sure to come, and God will raise the dead in their graves to life again. A great number of people accept these facts by intuition and common sense, but there are also a great number who reject them, believing that life is an act of blind chance and death is the end of everything. It would be wrong to give any credence to this notion, and it would also be wrong to accept the false belief that most philosophers and scientists are agnostics or unbelievers. In fact, many studies have shown the opposite to be the case. Rejection of God's existence through widespread does not stand upon sound scientific grounds. It often stems from sheer ignorance or arrogance or defective and bogus ideology. The attitude of Satan or Iblis is a case in point. He rebelled against God precisely because he recognized his existence. The surah goes on to talk about this belief, kufr, saying, some wrangle about God, though they have neither knowledge nor guidance nor divine revelation. They turn away in scorn and lead others astray from God's path. In persisting to deny God's existence, unbelievers are contradicting their own human nature and challenging the revelation sent down by God. The outcome of their attitude is bound to be appalling. There are also public who link their belief in God to what befalls them here in this life. That is, if they are prosperous and happy, they believe; if not, they rebel. The surah puts it thus: some people serve God half heartedly and remain on the fringe of true faith. When blessed with good fortune, they are content, but when an ordeal befalls them, they turn upon their heels. These forfeit deliverance in both this life and the life to come. That would be a real and total loss. This life is a term for testing, trials, and tribulations, during which man is free to choose and decide the direction he wishes to take in life. He meets with good as well as bad fortune, and his ability to cope with both is put to the test. To simply shrug off one's responsibilities and explain away these trials and ordeals as predetermined and therefore pointless would be foolish and disgraceful. The essence of Islam is submission to God and total acceptance of His will, whether good or bad. Success lies in the recognition of God's will, otherwise, man is welcome to challenge that will and see how far he can go. If anyone thinks that God will not succor him in this world and in life to come, let him reach out unto heaven by any other means and thus try to make headway, and that let him see whether this scheme of his will indeed do away with the cause of his anger. All matters shall be settled before God, who is equitable and fair, to whom all humankind shall return. God will judge fairly the believers, the Muslims, the Jews, the Sabians, the Christians, the Magians, and the polytheists on the day of resurrection. He bears witness to all things. Following this extended introduction, the surah turns to describe man's long-standing conflict between belief, iman, and disbelief, between carrying the banner of truth, haq, and raising the banner of falsehood, batil. There is no love lost between those who believe in God, those who deny His existence and sovereignty. Reconciliation appears to be impossible. But does this mean that conflict and bloodshed are inevitable? The answer must be in the negative. In the negative, believers are obliged to reason and argue with non-believers and show them the truth. In this task, they are bound by the constraints of wisdom, mutual respect, and reasonable argument, for both camps are equally under ovation. The truth needs to be explained and made easy to understand. If people refuse to accept it today, they must be given another chance to consider and must in all circumstances be treated fairly and without coercion. It was this patient approach which brought victory to Prophet Muhammad. Opponents of Islam may possess the material power to hurt the Muslims, but the arguments are shaky. There have always been efforts to silence or suppress God's messengers because they speak the truth and the truth has its own power behind it. In another surah, the Quran says, the unbelievers said to their messengers, return to our religion or we shall banish you out of our land. Their Lord revealed to the messengers, we shall destroy the wrongdoers and establish you in the land after them. Ibrahim 13-14. In this surah, the perennial confrontation between those who uphold the faith and those who reject it is covered in the passage which begins. Here are two antagonist camps who are in conflict over their Lord. These words are said to have been revealed in reference to the Battle of Badr in 1624 AC between the Muslims and the Arabs of Makkah. It was the first major armed clash between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and it came after 15 years of peaceful dialogue and patience on the part of the Muslims. The verses that follow point out that prophets of every generation had experienced similar hardship. The establishment of their religion required a great deal of patience and relentless hard work. The verses affirm that God stands in defense of the believers. God does not love the treacherous and the ungrateful. Permission to take up arms is hereby given to those who have been attacked because they have been wronged. God has the power to grant them victory. Those who have been unjustly driven from their homes or no other reason than their saying, our Lord is God. Had God not enabled people to struggle against one another, monasteries and churches and synagogues and mosques in which God's name is much invoked would have been destroyed. Prophets and their followers never incite wars of aggression and never condone bloodshed or unjustifiable war making. They do, however, try to oppose and suppress tyranny. God gives the believers victory because of the principles and values they uphold and represent, and not for their personal glorification. Verse 41 explains these principles. Those who once he gives them supremacy in the land will establish salah, give zakah, promote all that is good, and proscribe all that is evil. All matters will ultimately rest with God. The main objective of the work of God's prophets and their disciplines is to acquaint people fully with God and teach them how to extol and worship Him and how best to serve Him. Within the context of justifiable war and self-defense comes a passage introducing the topic which gives the surah its title Hajj or pilgrimage to Makkah. The surah gives a description of the main rituals of Hajj with the aim, it seems, of showing the Arabs how much they had distorted and deviated from the true religion of Ibrahim which they had professed to follow. How could they make such a claim when Ibrahim epitomized Tawheed and they were practicing sheer unmitigated paganism? The truth is that despite their assumptions to be its custodians, the Arabs had betrayed their religious heritage. This was made worse by their vicious hostility and opposition to the new call on Tawheed proclaimed by Muhammad. Those who refuse to believe and debar others from the path of God and from the inviolable mosque, the Kaaba at Makkah, which we have set up for all humankind, the natives and the visitors alike, and those who seek to profane it with evil or wrongdoing shall be sternly punished. To fight against such aggressors and violators would be considered justified and laudable. When one looks closely at the rituals of Hajj performed once a year, it becomes immediately clear that it is a magnificent and inspiring demonstration of man's devotion to God. It is a mass celebration of Tawheed held at a time and in place designated by God Almighty Himself, bringing people together from all corners of the globe. This excellent and worthy tradition was established many centuries ago by Ibrahim. The surah says, "We guided Ibrahim to the site of the mosque, the Kaaba, and said to him, 'Never take other gods beside me.'" It has been suggested that the Hajj is no more than a set of irrational and poetic rituals that are meant to test people's stamina and endurance and do not call for any understanding. This is a gross misapprehension. There is nothing in the Hajj rituals that is without a purpose or religious significance. Let us take the tawaf or circumambulation of the Kaaba. It is a form of prayer and an occasion for praising and glorifying God Almighty. Tradition and convention and religious practice, like in anything else, have their own intrinsic value and significance. Rationality and logic are not the only factors that determine such value and significance. The Kaaba is venerated for its universal symbolism as the first house built on earth exclusively for the worship and praise of the one God. It is the citadel of Tawheed. The surah goes on to introduce the Hajj rituals in more detail. Call, call on all people to make the pilgrimage. They will come on foot and on the backs of swift camels from every faraway place. They will come to avail themselves of many benefits and to invoke the name of God over a set of number of days and thank Him for the animals He provided for them to slaughter. Eat of their meat and feed the poor and the unfortunate. Modern technology and advanced means of meat processing and distribution have made it possible today to feed millions of people in Makkah and all over the world with the meat of animals slaughtered during the Hajj. We have made the well-fed camels a part of God's rites during the Hajj. There is much godness in them for you. Invoke the name of God when you draw them up in line to slaughter them, and when they are dead, eat of their meat and feed the poor, the needy. These rituals have a very real and a strong human side to them. They are a festival for the celebration of Tawheed on a communal scale. Avoid the profanity of idol worship and avoid perjury. Dedicate yourselves to God and serve none besides Him. He, he who serves other deities beside God is like a man who falls from heaven and is snatched by vultures or thrown away by the wind to a god for second place. A strong community must be built on a powerful mix of history and religious practices which combine nostalgia, emotions, and sound cultural roots. Those who observe and revere the rituals God has enjoined reflect God's consciousness, and that is in their heart. So, this is little bit from Surah Hajj, which is the Surah 22 of the Holy Quran, and it is Al Hajj. And now, friends, I will resume this in another broadcast. And so, this is the book, and you cannot see it because it is green in color, and I have a green screen. Here it is. So, now, friends, let me do I just wanted to remind you that these are my two books. The first one is The Modern Mughal Mentality, New Strategies to Succeed in India and the Global Marketplace. And the second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection. The first book, I want a documentary to be made out of it. So all those documentary makers, please contact me at drafshanhashmi.com. The second one is The Outbreak of a Monstrous Infection, and for this I want a movie to be made. So all those Hollywood, Bollywood producers, please contact me at drafshanhashmi.com. Having said that, friends, let's do a little bit of masterpieces of Urdu ghazals from the 17th to the 20th century, and this is the book. So let's read little bit from Asadullah Khan Ghalib 1797 to 1869. Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib was born at Agra, the city of the Taj, in December 1797. His father and his grandfather had been soldiers by profession and strangers to the art of poetry, and Ghalib was a very, very famous poet of Urdu. In one of his couplets, Ghalib alludes to his breaking away from his family's military traditions. And it says, generations of my elders have been men at arms, poetry brings no honor to me. But Ghalib had an inborn talent for poetry, which he displayed even in boyhood. And let's do a little bit of Ghalib's poetry. And I will do it in English because let everybody understand that. And it says, who can behold him? He is singularly unique. Had there been a shade of duality, him you might have seen. Your concern so mystic, imitable by your style, you would be a prophet, Ghalib, but for your mind. Another poetry. My pain would reckon no portion. I did feel I wasn't worse. Why do you collect my rivals? Why turn my complaint into a public show? Where can I go to meet my fate when you refuse to draw your sword? So sweet are your lips that my rival was not repulsed by your reapproach. The world is afloat. He comes today, not a mat to offer do I have today. Was it the world of God or Nimrod? Unrequited my worship lay, my life was his trust to him. I return, I haven't infused, reduced my trust. The wound though mass continued to breathe, the plan when thwarted reviled not again. And there is another Ghalib poetry, and it says, even if I visit him, how to answer his reproach, all the blessings that I knew were lavished on the guard. Life giving is mine, the hand that holds the cup finds all its lines to the line of life converge. Believers in one God rituals, we renounce, create, creeds when dissolved, merge into one faith. When one is used to sorrow, sorrow loses its sting. So many hardships have I borne, I find them hard no more. If Ghalib keeps wailing thus, O my fellow men, you'll find his happiness rendered desolate. So this was from this book. And now, friends, I just wanted to remind you that these are my two books, and I will read from each of these books. And here is a case study. The ECG machine GE Mac 800 is a great example of reverse innovation. Almost 65% of Indians live in villages. This is a huge market, but it cannot be served by products. Hospital infrastructure is either inadequate or absent in rural India. Therefore, rural patients cannot go to the hospital. The hospital has to come to them. So, portability is critical in medical care. There is a large income group between emerging markets and the developed countries. The per capita income in India is about $1,000, whereas per capita income in US is about $50,000. One example is the GE Mac 800. In 2008, GE innovated a portable ECG machine, Mac 400, serve the rural Indian population. Rural population cannot afford expensive healthcare. The Mac 400 cost about 50,000 Indian rupees, about $1,000, a fraction of the cost of the appliance-sized premium machines sold in the US. And you have to know, like this book was written long ago, so at that point this was the value of dollar, and now the value of dollar has increased. So now, a fraction of the cost of the appliance-sized premium machine sold in the US. In 2009, GE has brought an improved version of the portable ultra-low-cost ECG machine into the US, which is sold as Mac 800. This low-priced ECG machine has inspired new applications in the US in accident sites and in emergency rooms, where portability and small size are huge advantages. So This is one of the case studies, and I would love GE to sponsor my documentary, or other companies which are listed here to sponsor this or buy this book and distribute it among your people. And the thing is, through the sale of these books, I bring food to the table. Having said that, friends, now let's read a little bit from the outbreak of a monstrous infection. And when this book came in 2017, there was no trace of coronavirus. Henna and Music Night, December 24, 2018. After the daily press briefing at 4 p.m., all press was asked to stay for the Mehndi celebration in the evening in the Moria Sheraton. There was a special dance by Hollywood actress Angel Paul. The press was delighted to join the festivity. At 7 p.m. sharp, the groom's family arrived, and beautiful Las Vegas showgirls who were belly dancers were hired to receive guests with a garlanding ceremony. As the groom's side arrived, they all were first sprinkled with rose water and then given garlands of red roses to wear. After these beautiful girls garlanded the guests, and all the guests arrived by 8 p.m., handsome men in tuxedos were serving appetizers, which was hot tomato soup, chicken tikka, vegetable pakoras, dumplings, as well as hot tea and coffee lattes. And in the background, one could hear very soothing sitar music playing. Then the bride and groom arrived holding each other's hand, dressed as King Shah Jahan and Queen Mumtaz Mahal in their elaborate outfits. Shah Jahan, meaning King of the World, was the fifth Mughal emperor who ruled from 1628 to 1658. Shah Jahan commissioned many monuments, the best known of which is the Taj Mahal in Agra, which entombs his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, whom he loved the most among his other wives. Dr. Jack looked extremely handsome in a long sleeved green velvet coat, called a gown with beautiful golden zardozi embroidery. He wore a turban on the head, and patka and adorned sash was worn on the waist. Pajama style pants were also worn by Dr. Jack, while Dr. Rosie wore a beautiful and red Peshwa-style velvet robe with heavy zardozi or Mughal-style embroidery and churidar pants. The bride was wearing a beautiful green brocade churidar Mughal-style pant suit with a big dupatta scarf of 4 meters and intricate embroidery done on its matching the design of the churidar. She also wore lots of jewelry, including earrings, nose jewelry, necklaces, bangles, belts, and anklets. The jewelry had expensive and rare rubies, diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires. The decor of the henna and music night was red and green. Nisha Thakur, who had put henna on many Bollywood celebrities as well as on Hollywood celebrities who had visited India, was booked for this occasion. She was flown from Mumbai for this henna night. Hers henna was put on 50 guests by the girls in Nisha's entourage. So this was little bit from the chapter 4, Hina and Music Night, December 24, 2018. And I would request, to please go and buy these two books and give me an honest review. And through the sale of these books, I bring food to the table. Having said that, friends, I would love, to get a sponsorship for this show. And this show is syndicated worldwide to 300 million people. So just imagine how your product will be promoted in such a grand way. Having said that, friends, now I will end this broadcast, and cheers, Khuda Hafiz, Shukran, and bye bye.